Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. We're going to use a couple of different sources today to talk about something that happened 41 years ago today, and that was the tragic assassination, murder of John Lennon, a member of the Beatles. He was killed on December 8th of 1980. One of the earliest memories of my life was that event. I was just a little over 3 years old, and I remember a little bit of it. I remember it being a pretty big deal, but not much beyond that. Obviously, it was a huge deal. I mean, one of the most popular musical acts in all of recording industry history, if not the most popular, are the Beatles. They've influenced generations of music, and John Lennon's death was a pretty major event in the history of music. One of those tragedies right up there with the day the music died. Buddy Holly, who was an inspiration to John Lennon. John Lennon's been an inspiration to millions since then. So we're going to take a look at a video from a YouTube channel called How It Was, but we're also going to take a look at an interview that was done on the Larry King Show on CNN with Mark David Chapman, who is the man who killed John Lennon. So let's go ahead and watch some of this just to get a little bit of the background, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper.
Imagine, no possessions. Yeah, right. You told us how the world would be a better place if there was no money, Mr. Lennon. And here I am, waiting for your limo. Of course, a normal car's not good enough for you. Not good enough to bring you back to your $1 million home from a fancy dinner night, or wherever you are, John. You're phony, and someone's gonna stop your lies. Holden Caulfield will. I will. Oh, there you are. Okay. Holden Caulfield is ready. I am ready. Do it, do it, do it, do it!
That's pretty much how it happened, too.
December 8th, 1980, the day when a former Beatle, John Lennon, was shot and killed right outside of his New York City apartment. In this episode, we're going to explain why and show you how it happened. After his 10-year tenure in arguably the world's most famous band, the Beatles, John Lennon moved to the U.S. to continue the music career as an independent artist.
So the Beatles, I mean, everybody knows their story, but if you don't, they actually got the name the Beatles. They were inspired by Buddy Holly and the Crickets. Buddy Holly came to England for a tour, and these guys were just starting out in Liverpool. You know, John, Paul, Ringo, and George, and they were looking for inspiration. And here comes this guy who looked like a regular guy. He didn't look the part of a rock star. He wore glasses like John Lennon did. And so there's a lot of inspiration that happens there. And so that name, the Beatles, was an homage to the Crickets. And of course, they just become enormous, and not only in England but worldwide.
But his agenda quickly extended far beyond music. A radical political activist and avid critic of President Nixon for starting a war in Vietnam, at some point, Lennon had been a serious concern for many U.S. politicians.
So, I mean, the 60s are a time when not only the Beatles have become popular and the Rolling Stones and other groups in what they call the British Invasion, but now, like many people in the 60s, they're very vocal. In politics, you've got the Vietnam War raging, a lot of strong opposition to that war, and John Lennon gets involved in that.
Until 1980, when Mark David Chapman became forever infamous as the man who shot John Lennon. So, why did Mark Chapman kill Lennon? Like in many of the cases we review, we start collecting pieces of the puzzle from early childhood. Mark Chapman was growing up in a family where physical abuse was common. His father, a U.S. Air Force staff sergeant, would beat up his mom. Young Mark was trying to defend her, but at the time he wasn't strong enough. The destructive feelings of helplessness, fear, and self-doubt stayed with Mark through his childhood and adolescence.
So when you grow up feeling like, the world has wronged people that you love, and you're powerless to do something about it, well, there comes a point in your life where you suddenly find you do have the power. And sometimes people, when they find opportunities to express that power, they overcompensate. Mark Chapman's story is not unique in that regard.
Meanwhile, the U.S. was going through the sexual revolution. While the provocative covers of the Playboy magazine were becoming the new norm, a 16-year-old Chapman was looking for answers to why he felt so pathetic, alienated, and disconnected from the world around him. And he finally found his answers in the book called The Catcher in the Rye, written by J.D. Salinger. Chapman identified himself with the fictional novel protagonist Holden Caulfield. Like Holden, he believed that the root cause of his problems was in the hostile world created by the adults around him.
So interesting, Catcher in the Rye inspired at least one other would-be assassin, and that was John Hinckley, who shot President Reagan just a few months after this. They found among Hinckley's possessions a copy of Catcher in the Rye. There was a lot of talk about a connection between the two.
Those disingenuous and dishonest people, thinking about nothing but their benefits, joys of life, putting up smiles. Ugh, those fools. I hate all of them. As Chapman was growing older, there was just a handful of people who he admired. One of them was John Lennon. Oddly enough, the man who shot Lennon had always been a Beatles fan. He even once told his friends that he was dreaming about becoming Lennon.
And interestingly, too, the night that he shot John Lennon, just a couple hours earlier, he had actually gotten his autograph, and there's a picture of it. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. So here it is right here, and you see John Lennon signs an autograph for his killer mere hours before his death. There's David Chapman right there. And Chapman, interestingly, he says he was very kind to me. Ironically, very kind and was very patient with me. The limousine was waiting, and he took his time with me, and he got the pen going, and he signed my album. He asked me if I needed anything else. I said, no, sir, and he walked away. Very cordial and decent man. And just adds to the sadness of this whole thing, that here's this guy who had built up in his mind that Lennon was some kind of monster that was lying to people and needed to be stopped, and his actual interaction with him was very different. That happens a lot. People build up in their minds a certain image of what they think a public figure is like. And then oftentimes when they actually meet them, they find that it's very different, sometimes in a positive way or sometimes very different in a negative way.
An idea suddenly crossed his mind. He needed to get famous. Yeah, why not? Just like John. Why is he so famous and I'm a nobody? Chapman was asking himself. He struggled with that puzzle for a while until the solution was found. To become famous, he thought he might just kill someone famous. Paul McCartney, Jackie Kennedy, Elizabeth Taylor, Ronald Reagan.
Another person he actually talked about killing was Johnny Carson, of all people. But yeah, he did consider, I didn't know about Jackie Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, but I knew he had considered Paul McCartney and Elizabeth Taylor among his potential victims. But then something happened with John Lennon that caused him to zero in on him.
All of these people were considered by Chapman as potential targets. Wait a minute. If Mark Chapman admired John Lennon, why would he shoot him then? Oh, well, Chapman's a very controversial character. His opinion about Lennon completely changed over a few years. The first thing that got him angry about Lennon was John's uncareful claim about the Beatles being more popular than Jesus. A very religious young man, Mark Chapman was shocked when he heard that. But the thing that really got Chapman furious was the book John Lennon, One Day at a Time.
And it's interesting because Lennon did say those things, and but there was a time after Lennon said those things where Lennon actually found himself kind of, I wouldn't say he became a Christian, but he became much more sympathetic to Christianity and much more interested in it. And a lot of his diaries, he kind of wrote a lot about that. And I think he got back away from that by the time he died. But his opinions had changed a lot, I think, by the time Mark David Chapman comes along. But yeah, Chapman, early 70s, is very strong in his religious faith. And I think that blinded him a little bit to some things. And he actually, I think at some point, in his role of being involved in Christianity and involved in some mission groups, actually met Gerald Ford as well. So this guy had crossed paths with a lot of people along the way.
By Anthony Fawcett, which had portrayed Lennon as a wealthy person owning multi-million-dollar apartments in New York City, luxury yachts, farms, and country estates. Chapman could not comprehend how Lennon would preach peace and love, condemn excessive wealth, but yet have his pockets filled with millions of dollars. In his mind, Lennon became one of those liars, one of those adults who poisoned the world around Chapman. Finally, Mark identified his perfect target, the one who he hated more than anybody else in the world, and the one whose murder will immediately give Chapman the fame he had been craving for so long. Here's how he actually did it. Chapman knew that the former Beatle lived with his wife Yoko Ono in the Dakota apartment complex near Central Park in New York City. 6 weeks before the shooting, Chapman bought his gun legally in Hawaii, where he resided. He flew to New York from Hawaii and got the gun past airport security simply by placing it in the luggage. At the time, baggage checked with an airline was not searched or x-rayed. On a cold December night, Mark David Chapman was sitting in the Arch of Dakota building waiting for John Lennon. The gun was already in his pocket. John's limousine pulled over next to Dakota.
And this is after he had actually first met him a few hours earlier and got his autograph on an album. I think he actually went that night and bought a copy of Catcher in the Rye. I'm surprised he didn't have one with him. But he had gone out, or at least at some point after he got to New York, and bought a copy so he would have it with him.
Yoko got out first, Lennon second. As Lennon entered the arch, he saw Chapman and recognized the fellow who had asked him for an autograph a few hours earlier. Yeah, that sounds crazy, but just a few hours before shooting Lennon, Chapman had managed to get his autograph. So both Yoko and Lennon went right past Chapman. They didn't suspect anything. They were used to seeing fans near their home. A few seconds later, Chapman withdrew the gun and fired 5 steady shots.
And that part that they showed at the very beginning where he's saying, "Do it, do it, do it," that was something he said later was like in his mind, that he was hearing that voice saying, "Do it, do it, do it." And so he did. And I think 4 of the 5 shots hit Lennon.
4 bullets hit Lennon in the back. He never even saw them coming. Chapman's mission was finally accomplished. Stunned with what he'd done, he took a copy of The Catcher in the Rye out of his pocket and started reading it, waiting for the police to arrive.
And John Lennon didn't die right away. He actually stumbled into the doorway. I think he said, "I've been shot," or something like that, and was still conscious on the way to the hospital where he ended up dying.
John Lennon was quickly taken to a nearby hospital, where he was pronounced dead a few minutes after arrival. He was just 40 years old. In 1981, Mark Chapman was charged with second-degree murder and taken to Attica Correction Facility, the maximum security prison in the state of New York.
So he actually, his lawyers wanted to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. And there was a pretty compelling case for paranoid schizophrenia, but Chapman rejected that, and the court ended up ruling that he was in fact fit to stand trial, and over the objections of his lawyers, Chapman pled guilty. And he basically said, "Hey, I have no business ever getting out again for what I've done." He acknowledged that and was sentenced to, I think, 20 years to life. And so starting in like the year 2000, he was eligible for parole, and he's been up for parole like a dozen times or more. Most recently, I think last year, but his parole's been rejected every single time.
This is the story of John Lennon's assassination. This is how it was.
Yeah, I mean, so you have Lennon in December. You have the near assassination of President Reagan a few months later, I think in March of 1981 by John Hinckley. And Hinckley actually said that in addition to Jodie Foster, who was the person that Hinckley said he was doing it, there's a lot of parallels between Mark David Chapman and John Hinckley. Hinckley shot Reagan because he was trying to get Jodie Foster's attention. Jodie Foster was in college at the time. She had been a famous actress as a teenager. And he said that the other person he really looked up to besides Jodie Foster was John Lennon. And like I said earlier, he also was inspired by Catcher in the Rye. A lot of similarities there. Hinckley was sentenced on, or was found not guilty by reason of insanity and put into a mental facility. And I think he's been released since then. This guy, Mark David Chapman's only in his mid-60s at this point. He was only in his 20s when this happened. So I want to take a look now at a little bit of Chapman's interview that he did about, I think, 12 years after the assassination of John Lennon. So this is December 1992, so it's not the best quality, but it'd be interesting to hear a little bit of what he has to say.
You relive with us those terrible moments for you, for the world, for a lot of people around and in circles close to John Lennon. What happened that night?
Well, if you want to pick it up from the night, I was standing there with a gun in my pocket.
Knew you were going to shoot him?
Sorry?
Knew you were going to shoot him?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that surprises me about it being second-degree murder rather than first-degree. He had planned this. I mean, he bought the gun. He flew to New York specifically to do it. He used hollow point bullets specifically because he wanted to make sure that he actually killed him.
not to, praying not to, but knowing down deep it was probably going to come to that.
Did you know it would be that night? Did you know you would see him again?
Yes, I knew that morning, oddly, when I left the hotel, I had some type of premonition that this was the last time I was going to leave my hotel room. I hadn't seen him up to that point. That's what makes it interesting. I wasn't even sure he was in the building. And then I left the hotel room, bought a copy of The Catcher in the Rye, signed it to Holden Caulfield from Holden Caulfield, and wrote underneath that, "This is my statement," underlining the word "this," the emphasis on the word "this." I had planned not to say anything after the shooting. Walked briskly up Central Park West to 72nd Street and began milling around there with the fans that were there, Jude and Jerry, and later a photographer that came there.
And that was the photographer that took the picture of John Lennon signing the autograph for him.
Okay. And then John came out that day, right?
He came out. I was leaning against the gargoyle-studded railing and was looking down. I was reading The Catcher in the Rye, and I believe he got into a taxi and disappeared. And then later that day, I had gone to lunch with, I believe, Jude. We came back.
With who?
With Jude. She was a fan there that was there at the building. And we struck up a conversation about Hawaii, about John Lennon. She'd been there a number of times. And at one point during the day, she had left, and John came back out. I don't remember him going back in from the taxi, but he was obviously back in the building. He was doing an RKO radio special. And he came out of the building, and the photographer that I mentioned earlier, Paul Gorish, he kind of pushed me forward and said, "Here's your chance. You know, you've been waiting all day. You've come from Hawaii to have him sign your album. Go, go." And I was very nervous. And I was right in front of John Lennon there instantly, and I had a black...
Imagine what that must have been like. Here's a guy who's been thinking about murdering this guy, who has admired this guy for many years, and now all of a sudden he's face to face with him. And in that moment, you know, you've got those conflicting emotions of, I really admire this guy, but I also really feel this compulsion to murder this guy.
Black Bic pen. And I said, "John, would you sign my album?" And he said, "Sure." Yoko went and got into the car, and he pushed the button on the pen and started to get it to write. It was a little hard to get to write at first. And then he wrote his name, John Lennon, and then underneath that, 1980. And he looked at me, as I mentioned earlier, he said, "Is that all? Do you want anything else?" And I felt...
Couldn't have been kinder to him.
Then and now that he knew something subconsciously, that he was looking into the eyes of the person that was going to kill him.
I don't know if that's the case. I mean, maybe he feels that way, and I wasn't there, but I think he was just being genuinely a nice guy to a fan. And you know, a lot of... I've never been in that situation, so I don't know what it's like, and I can imagine it could be very overwhelming to be one of the most popular people in the world and constantly, you know, followed by fans and never really get any time to yourself. So I'm very slow to judge how people respond in those situations, because sometimes you just got to let those people be and let them live their lives a little bit, even though we know that's what they signed up for. So I actually, you know, I think very highly of John Lennon in that moment to have been that gracious with a fan when he's obviously on his way probably to lunch with his wife or dinner with his wife at that point, and probably could have just said, "No, you know, don't stalk outside of my home," you know, but he was very nice to him.
Why do you think that?
Well, his wife was in the car, the door was open, and he's a busy man. He's going to go to a radio or to his record studio, and he's talking to a nobody, just signed an album for a nobody, and he's asking me, "Is that all I want?" I mean, he's giving me the autograph. I don't have a camera on me. What could I give him?
I would admit that is a strange thing to say. All right, so he leaves.
Yes, he leaves in the car.
And what do you do the rest of the day?
I stand around like an idiot waiting for him to come back.
And what time did he come back?
He came back about 10 to 11 at night.
Had you eaten dinner?
No, I had not.
You stayed there the whole time?
Probably.
Knew you were going to shoot him?
Yes.
How did that happen? What happened?
Well, the photographer left. In all fairness, I have to say I tried to get him to stay.
Because?
There were those that felt that I wanted him to shoot pictures of the shooting, which is not true.
Why then did you want him to stay?
I wanted him to stay because I wanted out of there. There was a great part of me that didn't want to be there. I asked Jude, the fan, before she left for a date that night. She said no. If she'd have said yes, I would have been on the date with her.
But you might have killed him the next day.
I was going to say, but he might have come back another time and done it anyway.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
I would
okay.
have probably come back.
The circumstances of the killing, what happened?
I was sitting at the inside of the arch of the Dakota building, and it was dark, it was windy. Jose, the doorman, was out along the sidewalk. And here's another odd thing that happened. I was at an angle where I could see Central Park West and 72nd, and I see this limousine pull up. And as you know, there's probably hundreds of limousines that turn up Central Park West in the evening. But I knew that was his. And I said, this is it. And I stood up. The limousine pulled up. The door opened. The rear left door opened. Yoko got out.
And just to give you a little bit of a mental image of what this looks like, let's take a look at that spot real quick. So looking at here, you can see Manhattan. So this is downtown down here. This is Midtown. And then you have Central Park right here. Here's the Hudson River. So we'll zoom in. And there's actually a place, it's called Strawberry Fields, which is right across the street from where John Lennon was murdered. And there's a memorial to him there. And then this is the building right here that we're talking about. And it's just down the road from the American, I think it's the Natural History Museum. And then I'll see if we can zoom in on the spot where the actual shooting took place. Okay, so I think this is 72nd Street right here. So if we drag our little person, it's been a while since I've used Google Earth. So I think it's right in there is where we're looking. If we go right in on 72nd Street. So it would be right down this area. I guess I didn't go quite far enough to be able to do this. All right, now I think I've got it. So we're going to zoom in here, and this is the building right here, and this is the spot where John Lennon and Yoko Ono were dropped off and went in, and this is where John Hinckley shot him, and I think he stumbled into a doorway. I want to say on the right side is where that happened.
John was far behind, say 20 feet, when he got out. I nodded to Yoko when she walked by me.
She nod back?
No, she didn't. And I don't mean to be so clinical about this, but I've told it a number of times. I hope you understand. John came out.
And, I'll give him credit. He's acknowledging the lack of emotion in how he's telling the story and recognizing, hey, I understand. I'm talking about how I murdered someone. So maybe he's getting some help at this point. I don't know.
And he looked at me, and I think he recognized, here's the fella that I signed the album earlier. And he walked past me. I took 5 steps toward the street, turned, withdrew my Charter Arms 38, and fired 5 shots into his back.
What, had you shot that weapon before?
That weapon, no. I didn't even know if the bullets were going to work. And when they worked, I remember thinking, they're working. I was worried that the plane in the baggage compartment, the humidity had ruined them. And I remember thinking, they're working.
What did Yoko do?
She, naturally, and I can't blame her, she dashed around the stair area. I don't know if it's still there at the Dakota today, but she just, ran for cover, which is what anyone would do. John, according to what I've been told, stumbled up the stairs, and then I saw her come back around and then go up to the stairs, and then she cradled his body.
Did she scream?
I don't think she screamed, but a few minutes after that, there was just a blood-curdling scream from someone, and it put the hair on the back of my neck straight up.
Were you relieved?
No, what happened was I was in a... What happened before the shooting, before I pulled the trigger and after, were two different scenes in my mind. Before, everything was like dead calm, and I was ready for this to happen. I even heard a voice, my own, inside of me say, "Do it, do it, do it." You know,
Interesting.
Here we go.
The voice he heard. You have a lot of killers talk about voices in their head. David Berkowitz, the Son of Sam killer, talked about hearing voices, but in his case it was the voice of the dog next door whose name was Sam, which is why they called him Son of Sam. But Mark David Chapman saying, I heard my own voice telling me to do this. And boy, you know, he just seems, I don't want to say normal, but like a lot of people, you know, after the fact, once they're removed from the situation, Jeffrey Dahmer was the same way. Jeffrey Dahmer was very calm and collected when talking about this stuff. So was Ted Bundy and others. And it's very, very interesting to hear someone who murdered one of the most famous people in the world being interviewed and talking about what he did.
And then afterwards, it was like the film strip broke. I fell in upon myself. I like went into a state of shock. I stood there with the gun hanging limply down on my right side, and Jose the doorman came over, and he's crying, and he's grabbing my arm, and he's shaking my arm, and he shook the gun right out of my hand, which is a very brave thing to do.
Yeah.
To an armed person. And he kicked the gun across the pavement and had somebody take it away. And I was stunned. I didn't know what to do. I took the Catcher in the Rye out of my pocket. I paced. I tried to read it. I just couldn't wait, Larry, until those police got there. I was just devastated.
Interesting. One last thing I want to talk about before we finish this up. So as I mentioned, I think he's 66 now. Here's a picture that was taken of him about 11 years ago, in 2010. More recent mugshot. You can see he's, so he's probably in his mid-50s there. He's next due for a parole hearing in August of 2022. He comes up every 2 years for parole. And he actually, it says here, though Chapman had been a Beatles fan, he said he had been angered by what he deemed a hedonistic lifestyle led by Lennon, as well as his infamous remark about being more popular than Jesus. Chapman was a born-again Christian, which is also why he asked his legal team to drop the insanity defense they worked on before his trial for the killing. Instead, he pled guilty, citing the will of God as his motivation and not the delusional psychotic fandom often attached to the crime. It says he's in a special unit for violent and at-risk prisoners, though he spent much of his days working as a legal clerk and kitchen helper in the library. Turned down press interviews until 1987. 92 is the one where we saw him. Looks like he has done some since then. He was transferred to another prison in 2012, which is not far from Attica, where he had been. So there you go. There was a movie made in 2006 called The Killing of John Lennon, and Chapter 27 is another movie, Chapter 27, starring Jared Leto as Mark David Chapman. So I don't know a lot about this topic beyond that, but I just thought it was worth bringing up since today was the 41st anniversary, and I know John Lennon meant a lot to a lot of people, probably many of you as well. So let me know your thoughts about John Lennon, about what happened, other information you might have to add. Let's use this as a springboard for conversation. Thanks for watching.